Hi, Camillia.
Hi, Michelle.
It's good to see you. I'm so happy to see you.
I'm happy to see you too. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks for saying yes to this conversation about grief and COVID-19 and all the things that are intertwined with this moment we are trying to live through. Um, and I would love for you to share some about who you are and the work you do in the world.
Well, on paper, I'm a licensed professional counselor here in Portland, Oregon, and I'm in private practice. And my background is in cultural psychology. So that's translated into my clinical work, working with, certainly from a feminist perspective, liberation perspective, um, but seeing, couples who are um, mixed race or different religions or different cultural backgrounds, working with individuals who have that dynamic within themselves, and then specializing in with people who have religious or spiritual trauma or cult survivors. So I love it. It's great. It's great work.
Mm-hmm. And I know from our friendship and many goddess circles in my home when I lived in Portland that you also do lots of witchy things too. Oh yeah, I was like, she's not telling people this on purpose, but I'm telling everyone this now.
Just go ahead and out me, Michelle.
Yeah, there's another side that's into rituals and ceremony and practice. So
Yeah. Which I am so grateful for right now. Oh my gosh, the ceremonial work, the medicine work, the ritual work, the grief work. It's saving my butt right now.
hmm yeah, me too. Me too, for sure. So how is your heart amidst the moment we're in right now?
It's full of a lot of stuff. I think I sort of the word or the phrase that just popped into my mind was Pandoras Box. It's just like, ooh, can feel like the whole world is in there, like all the shit and all the glory. Um, and also, gratitude practices. I'm just, we are fortunate, we're lucky, we're blessed. So counting my blessings every day, and lots of humor keeps my heart buoyant. But I think, to be honest, I'll know on the other side of this, or whatever kind of new world we land in. Um, it's constantly reorienting to a lot of new stimuli.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Um, I'm curious about just thinking about your heart losses that you have experienced related to COVID-19 or that you're acutely aware of, right? As you connect to how you feel about this moment, are there losses you've experienced or losses you're just acutely aware of?
Um, training ground for this and informing me to help others is, the death of my mother. She died quite suddenly several years ago. And we had a complicated relationship, as you know, but there's still grief. And, the grieving process, like medicine work, is number one rule, just don't resist, spontaneously breaking down in tears and then feeling fine, normal. Right? It's okay. Just go with it. Allow it to flow. Allow it to move through. Um, that's a specific example, but as you know, my life has been rich. I'm more acutely aware of the world and the suffering that's happening. Um, First I was really feeling for, I mean, people without the privileges that I have, of course, the healthcare workers, you know, the doctor who suicided recently. You know, I have chills because I'm just becoming more and more acutely aware, because that's my field, of the mental health burden of this and the consequences of this, you know. Domestic violence, suicide, child abuse, you know, these things are on the rise and they impact us for a lifetime, you know. So my heart feels sorrow and care, just a lot of sadness for the suffering that's happening.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Are there things you're seeing with your people you work with, your clients? I'm just sort of wondering about themes that are coming up in your work with clients. Obviously, not divulging information about clients, but I interviewed another mental health healer practitioner and was asking her about that too. Like, what is she noticing in her practice related to COVID-19? Because like, I've never experienced a moment like this, even though some things feel familiar and are not new. There's so much of this that feels unfamiliar. Right? Going to the grocery store with a mask. I've never had to do that before, right? Or staying in my home most of the time, never had to do that. So are there things that are there themes coming up in your work with clients at this time?
Yes. Sometimes, you know, one appointment leads to the other and it's like I'm having the same conversation.
Mm-hmm.
What I've noticed is there's maybe like kind of a 2-week-ish range where things are kind of landing for people. I feel like this last week, people hit a wall. They're over it. They're over it. They're done. They're at the bottom of the well of their coping mechanisms. They feel like they've regressed, some of them, you know. I've got all this stuff that I've been working on, and I feel like I'm at square one again. And so just giving a lot of support that these are very unusual times. And what I believe is that we are highly irrational creatures. We pretend that we're making rational choices, but we're not. And so doing that deeper work helps to liberate those compulsions and automatic responses, reactivity, so that we can respond instead of react. So just really affirming how much work we're all doing below the surface, which I think kind of goes back to my heart. Like, I'll see, like, I know stuff is percolating and I know stuff is happening in there. People have been really tired. Like, well, yeah, you're working really hard. Transitions are hard. They take a lot of energy from us. They take a lot of attention and focus. I know I've been feeling very mentally fatigued, forgetting words and stuff, you know. So I think that lands with people. Like, it's okay. Again, there's nothing wrong with you. You're having an experience. Let your animal body be an animal body. Take care of it, you know. Take care of your soul. And trust that as you do that, what's happening below the surface is also doing its work, taking care of itself.
Mm-hmm. What you just said about the animal body and our coping and what we do to survive, right, made me think about the collective and sort of individually what we may be doing to survive and what's happening in this moment on the surface and below the surface. And I'm just curious about, you know, what you think about the collective in this moment. And this was not on the list of questions, to be real clear. But I'm thinking about our collective animal body. I'm thinking about our collective coping. I'm thinking about what is underneath the surface, and just wondering if you have anything comes through related to that, because I know so often you're working with individuals, or I'm working with individuals, and also thinking about the larger themes that are emerging in the collective. That's where my question or curiosity is coming from.
Yeah, and that's where, I mean, I'm fascinated with that because my background's in cultural psychology, and these psychic memes that take hold of us, incredibly grippy and captivating. I mean, I think the most basic response to that is, if you've ever watched, I'm a movement analyst as well, and also did my work on cultural themes, indigenous practices as community-specific psychological recuperations. So if you have seen a room where someone, you can see fear spread through bodies. And it's fascinating. And how I describe that to people is we're mammals. We have that limbic brain, and that connects us to everyone around us. So, the antelopes or whatever, the zebra comes in, one feels it, and like a second later, they're all, they bounce. Mm-hmm. So we're like that. We have this neocortex that regulates and suppresses stuff, which can be handy, but can also definitely go against us. But yeah, this leads me to an important point, just in my personal work and with a lot of people that I work with, because a lot of people identify as empaths or highly sensitive people. And the question that was given to me that's been really helpful, and the question that I give to others is this mine or is this someone else's? Is this my grief or is this the collective grief? And I think it's different. And how we work with it is different. I think, I don't know, I'm working with this, but it's sort of like, if it's like being aware for most of us as women of color, the emotional labor that we do. Mm-hmm. And it's a conscious choice to do that labor if we want to, and we don't have to if we don't want to. And so we talk a lot about holding, right? But I think when it's my own, I can hold it. When it's out there, allowing it. Like, I don't have to fix it. It can happen, but I definitely don't have to hold it. So that's been a helpful practice. This right now, being able to distinguish the two in my own self.
Mm-hmm. And are there, thinking about the individual and collective, and this idea of, is it my grief or is it the collective grief, which in large part, I mean, there's so much unprocessed grief that was present before, which certainly in my mind, in opinion, has led to the response to this virus in so many ways, and how institutions are responding is what I mean, and even individuals, because we make up culture and institutions. So I'm wondering what you are doing to attend to your grief individually. And then I'll ask a follow-up question about the collective. But are there, you mentioned some rituals, you mentioned some practices, you mentioned humor, right, when you were talking about your heart. Are there things that you are practicing right now to help the grief move through, to not resist the grief, what you named earlier?
Yeah, thinking about and conceptualizing these things in different ways according to what I'm seeing and what I'm experiencing myself is, there's a difference between sadness, which is a part of grief, and depression. And I think people are afraid of going into the sadness part of grief for fear of getting stuck. So I think the things that help me with that are, nature. It's just such a teacher. We have a garden, and I make a point of going out there and just everything. And it's just, all the lessons are there.
Mm-hmm.
Everything in its own time. You can't force anything. Just nurture it. Give it what it needs. Try to put it in the right places. And I'm looking at this big, beautiful tree out my window right now. Just, all the leaves came out the last week or so. It's beautiful, and it's such a strange paradox, but that's the wisdom path, right? Is to be able to hold both and. Like, wow, people are dying, and there's birds building a nest on my porch, right? And it's all here. The both and really helps me to not get sticky with stuff and just, again, be allowing. And, I'm curious about because you are, you've been working with grief and your deck and, your books and everything for a while. So I'm curious about this. But for me, I've always thought that grief and joy are like on an axis. Yeah, okay. And if we have to allow our grief to have joy. So you're nodding your head. I want to hear what you have to say.
Well, that's the theme that came up in I did the other interview series about grief and liberation. And I was thinking about the connection between the two. And in my mind, joy is connected to liberation or ease or freedom, right? And that came up so much in the interviews. Like, people would talk about grief and love, they would talk about grief and joy. So I think they are on an axis, right? And they're in relationship. And when Amy interviewed me for that, I said something about exactly what you said about we have to allow the grief to move through if we want to feel joy. But it was something like that. I can't remember exactly how I said it. So yes, I completely agree with that, because unprocessed grief is going to block joy, right? Or block that feeling of ease or liberation, like physically, energetically, mentally, spiritually, in all of the ways. So I totally am with you in what you shared.
So humor has been great. And just from like pulling away from the stickiness of, the depressive scale, and gratitude and humor, making sure to weave that in as well has been really helpful. And then finally, my community, like just the badass, amazing people I have in my life who are like, oh, all right, COVID, game on. Let's do this. Like allowing themselves to be worked and cooked in the process and welcoming it,
Mm-hmm.
Obviously not the suffering, but just what it's bringing up for themselves, again, because it's here.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Did it answer your question?
Yeah, it did. And it just makes me think of like conditioning, cultural conditioning. And I've only lived in the US, so I'm talking about this culture, although this may translate to other cultures. I just like to speak about where I'm from, not other places. I feel like there's conditioning around feeling one thing or the other, not feeling multiple things. And that grief is like, no, you're going to feel 10 things in the next 10 minutes, right? And then it's going to start over. And then maybe there's a pause and some respite, and then it's going to happen again. And you're going to be confused. Like, that is the process of grieving. That's what it is. That's what it offers. So I'm sure that many folks are having to adjust their binary thinking and way of being to actually respond to the emotions that are arising.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's helpful, it turns out.
Right? Yeah, I know. It's a powerful, potent time for sure. And there's a lot of suffering.
Yes. And unfortunately, that seems to be the way of things in human history. That growth, I don't know. I don't want to speak to that just yet, but humanity definitely knows suffering. And yeah, the conditioning piece, I mean, what an exciting time to liberate yourself from cultural conditioning. Like, why not? What do you have to lose? The world's clearly falling apart. The old models are not working. The abuses of power, the power grabs, the corruptness, the greed, the class and racial inequalities, the gender inequalities, like, it's all electric neon right now, at least to me. And just how polarized we are. I've been speaking of the both and, kind of making a practice to, like the people who are protesting in Michigan, for example, like listening to their arguments and seeing what their perspective is and trying to understand the other, right? And not just buying into the low-hanging fruit of liberal media that just strokes all my personal agendas. Because we're not going to birth another world that way. It's violent. To ignore, belittle, dismiss the realities and the experiences of the other.
That leads me to my question about the collective, and I think you've spoken to this, and if there's anything else you want to name about why it's important to acknowledge our collective grief, like in this moment, and history has sort of humans have created history that has created collective grief. So why is it important for us to acknowledge it and process it as a collective body?
I'm going to talk about medicine work, if that's okay. Okay. So, because it's what feels most resonant in response to this question. I have some birds out my window.
I heard one a moment ago. Yeah.
They're quite loud. They're little, they're quite loud. It's delightful. Whether it's, I've done peyote ceremonies and ayahuasca ceremonies and others, and it's very much a reality from the cultures that they come from of, purging or getting well for the other. That there's a collective dream that can show up in this kind of ad hoc family for a weekend or whatever. And in my own experiences of going into the collective wounding and feeling it, I know this is not unusual, it's kind of the power of these medicines. They are the antidote to individualism. And so I think it's there, I've experienced it, and the power of it. And I think we're all, we all have access to that. And we're all being influenced by it, whether we're aware of it or not. Whether it comes out sideways in a release of some sort, or whether it's responded to. And not everybody is going to do medicine work, nor should everybody do medicine work. You don't have to do medicine work. You can sit in a group of people and share in the burden, of like the weight. And I don't think that's just a good practice. I think it's actually necessary for us as humans. Again, because we're social primates, we're herd animals. We need that tribe, that herd, that group to be psychologically well. So, tend to your communities, gather, allow. And that's how we heal these fragmentations in ourselves and in the collective. Because you're right, the individuals, like I've been talking to clients for years about this, saying like, this matters, this work matters, it ripples out, trust me, it really does. And they're coming back to me now and they're saying, I'm so glad that I have some tools and I've been doing this work, because whatever comes into my field, I don't pass it on. It doesn't have to sink in. I know what my truth is. I know how to regulate myself, and the buck stops here. And, that comes from our personal work. It also comes from the strength of the tribe.
Yeah, thank you for sharing about medicine work and the collective and healing is what collective healing is what I hear in that, and how we practice that, and just how necessary it is. Because, and I thought that about this earlier when you answered a question, we just pass on our unprocessed trauma and grief in so many ways. And I think there's enough like trauma that I'm not actually aware of that I'm probably passing on, right? And then I'm doing intentional work, right? To learn more and to build my awareness and raise my consciousness and be intentional about how I show up in space, how I care for myself, how I care for others. And so I just appreciate what you named. And because I think it's important for people to understand, if we don't take space to process this as a collective, that we will replicate. It may not look like a virus, although oppression feels like a virus, right? White supremacy feels like a virus. The patriarchy feels like a virus. But it may not look like a virus like COVID-19. It will be something else, though, that will highlight the inequities, the injustices, the nature of suffering, the causes of suffering, where we're suffering, right, and disconnected. And so I think it is necessary, everything you just named. And that's my hope for, in part, for what comes out of this, that we are able to connect and not dissociate and be in community and prioritize people and relationship and healing.
Amen. Ashe.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Thank you for doing the work that you do, Michelle. You're such an amazing person. I'm so glad that you're in my life.
I'm glad you're in my life.
Truly, truly, truly.
Yeah, I'm glad that you're in my life. So grateful for you and the work you do and your practices and the gifts that you offer to your clients and to the world and your friends and your community and beloveds. So powerful. You're powerful, right? Your practice and your energy and work. Is there anything else you want to share with people who will be watching this or listening to it before we close out our time together?
It's hard. It's been challenging. I've been pushed. I don't know anyone who's not being pushed to grow right now. So that's great. And how I think about it, we talk about getting stretched. But I also think about a range, like a musical range or a range, a repertoire of responses within us. And clearing the pathways in us so that, we can get fucking pissed and back the fuck off if we need to. But we don't need to do that if someone accidentally steps on our toe. But if someone steps on our toe and then threatens to punch us in the face, we need to respond appropriately and to have access, And you could say the same for grief. I think of grief as the umbrella, There's a lot in there. All of it. But it's good to get stretched. It's good to go into places that are unfamiliar and to hang out for a while and get curious. And certainly if you have trauma, get support right now. This is a great time, whatever that looks like. I'd say a community is great. Professionals, a good professional is great, whatever that looks like. To get support, because it's definitely triggering right now. And as some friends of ours say, never waste a good trigger, to get curious, work through. So I don't know, I guess I want to leave with, this is hard, and I honor that. And having been to hell and back a few times, I know that there's so much medicine here, and so much is happening, and you're growing probably more than you realize. To the collective you, whoever is watching this.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for that offering, and thank you for spending time in this conversation today and time with me. Yeah, I appreciate you and love you, of course, and thank you for saying yes to this and for just offering lots of tools to folks, because we need them.
Yeah.
So, thank you.
Yep. I'm woo-woo, but I'm also pragmatic as hell. I try.
You offered like 10 tools, you really are. It's like, okay, I can practice that, and what's mine and what's theirs, and like grounding and connecting with nature. You offered a lot of pearls of wisdom and tools that feel accessible.
Good.
We don't need something else to actually create the experience that's inside of us. We can, resource ourselves. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe it's my Virgo moon.
Mm-hmm.
Mint and practical. The herb closet.
It's true. That's funny. Thank you so much.
Thank you for doing this, Michelle. I adore you. I love you. I appreciate you so much. It's been such a treat to have this time with you.
Thank you. I love you too.
Bye.
Bye.
You are your beating heart. Ready, crack open.